Hello.
Hello.
That's right. It is YouTube time this time, all the time.
If you like poetry, if you like literature, if you like cultural history, then you've come to the right place. We make podcasts about all of those things. So be sure to like and share this video. And of course, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you never miss an upload.
Since we mostly make podcasts, you can also find our shows on all the major podcast platforms. So if you found this video, but YouTube isn't your speed for regular podcast listening, head over to Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, and subscribe there.
All right. Hope you enjoy the episode.
Hello and welcome to this special episode of Close Talking. I am co-host Jack Rossiter Munley. Toni Morrison died just over a month ago, and we discussed her poem Someone Leans Near on our 75th episode. There is so much about her continually astonishing work and far-reaching legacy that we have more of that conversation to share this week. We talk about how her writing has touched lives and inspired many, even those who did not become writers themselves or pursue any kind of literary career. Before we dive into the episode, just a quick reminder that it would mean the world to us if you hopped over to the Apple Podcasts area, iTunes Store, however you prefer to think of it, and left this show a rating and a review. Those ratings and reviews are the best way to boost us up the old iTunes algorithm and help more people find the show. So, without further ado, on to the show.
It's called Someone Leans Near by Toni Morrison. Someone leans near and sees the salt your eyes have shed. You wait, longing to hear words of reason, love or play to lash or lull you toward the hollow day. Silence needs your fear of crumbled star ash sifting down, clouding the rooms here. You shore up your heart to run, to stay, but no sign or design marks the narrow way. Then on your skin a breath caresses the salt your eyes have shed. And you remember a call clear, so clear, you will never die again. Once more you know, you will never die again. It does really open up at the end in terms of the rhymes after the, with the caresses.
But again, part of why it's so cool and still feels like it all fits together is because it still has repeated lines. So even though it's not rhyming anymore in the same way, it's still like got them callbacks. It's got those callbacks going.
Yeah. And it also the last two lines, once more you know you will never die again. That second to last line, once more you know, is I think the shortest line in the poem, along with the very first one, Someone Leans Near. It's just 4 syllables. And that made me think of the T.S. Eliot poem, The Hollow Men, which now that I remember it, got a good hollow echo, who's to say. But that poem sort of famously ends, this is the way the world ends, this is the way the world ends, this is the way the world ends, not with a bang but a whimper. And there's a kind of, I think either I read it somewhere or there was a teacher I had who told me, but there's like a reading of that where like there's a build-up in the repetition of this is the way the world ends, and the kind of way that the poem cuts off quickly, like not with a bang but a whimper, kind of enacts the whimper of the poem as a kind of thing. Like, you think it's gonna be something great that the way the world ends, and it's not. And it's not the same meaning at all, but the shortness of, that last couplet, once more you know you will never die again, especially after the couplet before it, and you remember a call clear, so clear, which like in the repeating so clear is like unnecessarily elongating itself, it's like it doesn't need to add the so clear like for meaning, it's just like adding a whole another thing. And so it's like the end also in the same way, maybe we should do a little special ep on short endings, but the Weather in Space by Tracy K. Smith.
Great short ending.
Great short ending. That one we sort of had talked about, and that poem, has this thing where it has this short, like, phrase kind of thing in the line, is God being or pure force, and then the wind, or what commands it, which that part comes on the next line, and it sort of repeats that over and over. And then the last line is faces radiant with panic. And you expect there to be a kind of extra beat there on the end, which you're denied. And so all of these endings, I think, kind of like cut things off quicker than what you've been like, what the rhythms are telling you it should end. In a way, I think partly it gives it a really strong sense of finality, because you're like, oh, that shit is over. I mean, that poem is done. Thought it was going, no more done. It's not like it's not like those songs where they like couldn't think of an ending, and so they literally just fade out the same thing over and over, which thankfully doesn't happen anymore,
like
or at least not as much.
Aerosmith's Dream On, which interestingly the chords themselves are unresolved, and it's just that but it just fades out. So come on.
Yep, this is not a fade out. And I think partly that's just, at at this poem's end, there's a knowing that is realized, and it's a kind of finality to that knowing. Once more, you will never die again. And the
it's
Christmas
sort of like when Aerosmith's Dream On is performed live and they end it by hitting a gong. Instead of just fading out, which they sort of do, because they're like, na 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 na. Gong. Couldn't think of anything else.
Yep. It's also like a different reference, but this is what it's maybe. There's the band Boy Genius.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very obsessed with them. The song, they have a song called Ketchum, Idaho, and they're like the lyrics, the chorus is like, I am never anywhere I go. When I'm home, I'm never there long enough to know. And that's repeated in the choruses. But then at the very end, it's, I am never anywhere I go. When I'm home, I'm never there long enough.
I am never anywhere I go. When I'm home, I'm never there long enough.
And it cuts off the long enough to know. So it's like, you think that's coming, and then it doesn't come, and then you're like, oh, we ended. But then it's also like the meaning's a little different now, because it's like, I want to be home longer, and I'm never home long enough. And you're like, you're so clever, you're a boy genius.
Heck yeah.
And
there's also the blues song Messin' with the Kid, where there's a riff that runs throughout it, which is ba na 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 na. And then they sing the verse, and then it's like, you call it what you want, And you think they're going to say, I call it messing with the kid, because that's the rhyme. But no. I call it messing with the... And then the lyrics stop, and it just goes...
You can call him what you heard. I call him nothing.
Nice.
Yeah.
No, they're all examples of a creation of expectation and a sort of subversion of that through a shortening suddenly in different ways. But yeah, I think my last thought, and I keep coming back to the repetitions, and I mean, I like the little formal gizmos. But this was something that I had did my college English major thesis thing on the poetry of W.B. Yeats. And at any rate, there was he has a lot of repetitions and echoes, and I mean, it's a repetition obviously is common in lots of poetry. But one thing that I was exploring in that was this use of the echo and the repetition as like a kind of insistence of life in the face of death. So there's a way of repeating as a way to redo something, as a kind of formal way of like trying to reassert one's presence, even though because it's, like an echo, it's always fading away, so it's kind of doomed to fail. But there's this one poem by Yeats called Man in the Echo, and it's kind of like this guy is alone and sort of says things, and then every so often it's a dialogue and the echo just repeats himself. And so like there's this, and all seems evil until I sleepless would lie down and die. And then the echo chimes in and is like, lie down and die. And it's very similar actually to how the myth of Echo and Narcissus goes. It made me think of, there's this sense there of this feudalness, but trying to like hold on to something. And there was an interesting parallel of repetition in this poem where like you will never die again is repeated. And so this kind of like the thing that can't be repeated is repeated, or the knowledge of that, right? And so like even though death itself is final and will happen and will never happen again, the poem in its sort of like reassertion of that knowledge, like, I don't know, it feels like the repetition is trying to take away some of that finality or create some kind of resistance against it. The broader point, which is that's a very micro example, is, the way that poems and also plays like Othello and, all language, the great way that they have, durable life is the retelling and the rereading and the re-echoing of their words. And so, like, and in that way also it is the presence of another who's doing the work, not just the writer, but the one who's speaking it or reading it has to do that work of like summoning the echo of the piece back into existence. It's a very overread, but it was something I was taking comfort in, that there's in this poem, which is sort of confronting, a topic that is, now sort of like all too real for Morrison. There's this sense and power in, you know, the way that this poem is asserting and reasserting itself, I guess.
I love that, because in a lot of ways that essentially is putting her own quote about death and life and language into the ending of the poem. I don't necessarily think it's a huge overread, because, again, the quote is literally, "We die, that may be the meaning of life, but we do language, that may be the measure of our lives." And to have the meaning and the measure condensed like this, which I feel that when I read the end of this poem, that feels real, is, I don't know, I mean, that, yeah, I feel that, definitely. And as you said, it's sort of a comforting thought, because, I mean, I don't know, something this also has me thinking of is that the second part of her quote about not liking her work to be poetic is about the specific work she wanted to do in elevating the language of Black people and the kind of stories that it was possible not just to tell about Black people, but for a Black person, and specifically a Black woman, to tell, and that so much of the work that she did in her life and so much of how she will live on forever is beyond her own work, but also the various writers that she mentored personally, but just the vast fields of literature that her books and essays and these 5 poems existing opened up for so many other people, that lives on in a million ways that can never be measured or fully understood, probably. And I feel like that's also present in what you were talking about. And if, you know, doing language is partially a measure of our lives and how we live on and stuff, I mean, that is an incalculable aspect. And yeah, she's never going to die again. That happened once. It is obviously consequential, but the ways in which she will live on are so much greater than that one event. And I feel like that's also captured in the ending of this poem, and particularly in how you were describing it.
Yeah, no, that's really good and a really, really important point. And it makes me think of, there's a great essay that came out in 2003 in the New Yorker by Hilton Als, and he was profiling Toni Morrison, and Morrison had, you know, was friends and colleagues with the poet Sonia Sanchez, who was another prominent Black writer in that sort of era of the 70s and onward. But Sanchez had taught the Bluest Eye in when she was teaching at Temple, and this is from what Sanchez told Hilton Als. For this woman, Sanchez says, Toni Morrison, to write this, to show this to us. What Toni has done with her literature is that she has made us look up and see ourselves, us being Black people. She has authenticated us, and she has also said to America, in a sense, do you know what you did? But in spite of what you did, here we exist, look at us. And Morrison said, what was driving me to write was the silence. So many stories untold and unexamined. There was a wide vacuum in the literature. And I was inspired, to kind of fill that vacuum, which I think really speaks to your point. It's impossible to overstate, even if someone has not read Toni Morrison, certainly they have encountered writing or work that has been, indelibly affected and inspired and influenced by her work. Should we read it again?
I think we should read it again.
Someone leans near and sees the salt your eyes have shed. You wait, longing to hear words of reason, love or play, to lash or lull you toward the hollow day. Silence needs your fear of crumbled star ash sifting down, clouding the runes here. You shore up your heart to run, to stay. But no sign or design marks the narrow way. Then on your skin a breath caresses the salt your eyes have shed. And you remember a call clear, so clear, you will never die again. Once more you know you will never die again.
Hey, thanks for listening.
If you enjoyed this episode, head on over to Apple Podcasts and leave a review. Those reviews help us with the algorithm and are the best way for us to find new listeners.
Do you have thoughts about this poem? Or is there a poem or poet you'd like us to cover on a future episode? We would love to hear from you, and there are tons of ways to get in touch.
Yes, you can send us an email to closetalkingpoetry@gmail.com or find us on Twitter. I'm at Jack Rossiter Munn, Connor is at Connor M. Stratton, and the show is at Close Talking.
On Instagram, we are at Close Talking Poetry, and we are on Facebook at facebook.com/closetalking.
And speaking of all of those many and varied social media platforms, a very special thank you to our incredible social media manager, Corey Chena. Woo woo! Woo.
Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time. Come back again.
Please come back just one more time.
Door's always open. Okay, bye.
See ya.